I mean, I'm very fond of the United States. I went to university there. Most of my friends are actually American. But I'm seeing what's happening in America, especially this past few days. And I'm just horrified. I think this is a new normal. I think that America is heading towards a civil war. And I don't think there's any way out of this situation. It's a very dire predicament. Donald Trump is, first of all, a unique historical figure. But if I had to pick an analogy, I think he would be most similar to Julius Caesar. So let's go over to some aspects of Julius Caesar that resonates with Donald Trump. So Julius Caesar became powerful because he took his army into Gaul and he enslaved the population. Basically, Julius Caesar conducted this unwarranted war of imperialism against innocent people, which made himself and his soldiers rich. And it made his soldiers extremely loyal to him as well. The patrician class in Rome became extremely annoyed with Caesar and wanted to indict him, basically impeach him. And so Caesar crossed the Rubicon and installed a military dictatorship. And so we're seeing a very similar situation play out in the United States as well, where Trump is creating these paramilitary forces like ICE that are loyal only to him because only he will support their brutality. What we saw in Venezuela is the rise of Delta Force. So in the future, perhaps Delta Force will become the Praetorian Guard for Donald Trump. What's driving all of this is tremendous popular discontent, where people don't feel as though there's any hope of a better future. Remember, in 2020, the Democrats told the people, as long as we get rid of Donald Trump, things will go back to normal. And Joe Biden came into office, inflation hit record highs. Rather than trying to make lives better, Janet Yellen in the Treasury Department gaslighted people and told them, oh no, we're not really in a recession, even though everyone knew they were in a recession. When Putin invaded Ukraine, Biden imposed these sanctions that boomeranged against the American economy. Biden and his people should have negotiated for peace in Ukraine, but Biden insisted on a full-scale war with Ukraine, which has led to basically the collapse of the American empire throughout the world. So there's public discontent, but the Democrats do not have any solutions. As the midterms approach, the Democrats could be a party of no wars, more wealth redistribution. But instead, they have absolutely no policy ideas. And the only thing that they promise the people is we're not Trump and we'll probably impeach Trump if we get into office. So right now, the choice for the people is not one between democracy and monarchy. It's really one between monarchy and oligarchy. And given this choice, historically, people choose to pick monarchy because the first thing that monarchs tend to do is they actually cancel the debt in something called the Jubilee. And that's a very common way for kings to cement popular support. So I imagine, if Donald Trump were to become king, and that is certainly his ambition, and he would cancel all debts, including student debt, including mortgages, and this would be tremendous relief to the American people. Okay, so I think Julius Caesar is the best analogy, and a lot of it is just driven by incompetence among the ruling elite. The Democrats, the oligarchs, absolutely refuse to admit that they've done anything wrong. They refuse to admit that America has become a corrupt oligarchy, and they have stymied any political changes, including Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders had won in 2016, then America and the world would be a very different place. So it's not just Trump, it's also this elite that enables Trump. Another thing that I will say is that what seems to be driving Trump is his thirst for revenge. For Trump, the biggest trauma in his life is the 2020 election against Joe Biden, because he is absolutely convinced that he won the election. But Joe Biden, the Europeans, Obama conspired against him. How? Well, first of all, you had the George Floyd protests in Minnesota, right? The Black Lives Matter protests. Then you had the COVID lockdowns. Then you had the mail-in ballots that swung the election in favor of Joe Biden at the very last minute. So we can see much of what he's doing as a revenge tour. So he hates the Europeans because he's convinced the Europeans conspired with Obama against him in 2020. And that's why we're seeing Trump being so antagonistic against the Europeans. That's one front. Another front is that, why did Trump go in and kidnap Maduro? Because I think what will happen during the trial of Maduro is that Maduro will tell the people that Venezuela participated in election fraud in 2020. He will present evidence that the election was rigged in 2020. And now what we're seeing in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, these ICE agents going around and wreaking havoc. And, how things will develop in Minnesota is tremendously important, because I think that there's a very strong likelihood that what Trump will do next few weeks is he will pardon Jiang Xueqin, and this would set the nation on fire. But it plays very much into Trump's psychology. He's trying to create as much havoc as possible. He's really trying to instigate a civil war with his actions. I mean, how else can you explain the fact that you have these ICE agents going around America and besieging average American citizens? And remember, these ICE agents, their responsibility is to deport illegal immigrants. But guess what? Right. Under Obama, you had more illegal immigrants deported than under Trump, even though you have this paramilitary force called ICE. I think their main job is to test out the possibility of a secret police in America. There's plans to deploy the National Guard to all 50 states this year. So it seems as though they're trying to create the conditions for martial law, for martial law. I mean, let's consider what Julius Caesar did. So what Julius Caesar did was he created a myth of himself as this great conquering hero. And so that's why we see Trump instigate wars all around the world, right? So Trump went into Venezuela. He's talking about bombing Mexico and Colombia. And he's talking about taking over Greenland and Canada and Cuba. He's now considering attacks against Iran. And even though you and I are horrified by this, at a fundamental human psychological level, this inspires awe and fear among the people, which is what a great king tries to do. So Trump is trying to present himself, first and foremost, as this great conquering hero who will restore the American empire. Number two is that, as I mentioned, he's trying to create military forces that are loyal only to him. Peter Hegseth last September, he said that the new military doctrine is the warrior ethos. We will disregard all rules of engagement. We will engage in maximum lethality. So he's really talking to a special group of people in the military, which is the special forces, the Delta Force, the Green Berets. These are people who are more sympathetic to this sort of rhetoric. So they will eventually become the most loyal to Trump, which will allow Trump to engage in targeted assassinations, sabotage, infiltration, which is what he needs in order to basically get rid of his political opponents. That's number two. Number three is civil war. So to create us versus them mentality, one between left and right, Democrats and Republicans, where you're forced to pick sides. In that situation, many people will rally around Trump. That's number three. Number four is to create a national emergency. It could be civil war, but it could be economic collapse as well. So basically, from a Trump perspective, the more chaos, the better, because it allows him to consolidate power. Then, of course, you have the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby is very much interested in a war against Iran. And, Netanyahu visited Trump, right before the New Year's in Mar-a-Lago. And what happened right afterwards? Well, you have the kidnapping of Maduro. You have these Iran protests. You have Trump saying that he will defend these protesters in Iran. This is not a coincidence. This is all part of a larger scheme to overthrow the Iran regime and cause collapse in Iran so that Israel can create the Greater Israel Project. And so if Trump is able to deliver this to Israel, then Israel will give Trump whatever he wants. So, Miriam Adelson has promised Trump $250 million if he were to run for a third term. Elon Musk has pledged $200 million for the midterms. So the resources of the Israel lobby cannot ever be overstated. And all the conditions are in place now for civil war. You have a polarized information landscape where people just live in their own bubbles. So you look at the shooting in Minnesota, and both the left and the right are absolutely convinced they're right. The left is convinced that this is an innocent woman who was killed for no reason. The right is actually convinced that she is a provocateur. She did this. She tried to run over the officer, and the officer did it in defense. And there's actually no reconciliation between these two sides. The reality is that both the Democrats and Republicans have certain paramilitary factions that will incentivize and propel a civil war. Okay, so the Republicans have these white nationalist groups, the Proud Boys, The Democrats have, Antifa. So these are street gangs that they can deploy in order to achieve certain political purposes. The reality is that the oligarchy benefits from a civil war because you have this massive discontent. And historically, either the people engage in a civil war or they engage in a revolution. So do you prefer revolution or do you prefer civil war? Also, right now, what's happening in Washington is this massive conflict among certain deep state factions. And I don't think people really appreciate the level of conflict right now in Washington, D.C. And traditionally, historically, the way that these conflicts among the elite are settled is through civil war on the streets. The people are sacrificed in order to achieve certain political agendas. I think that what's going to happen is that over the next few weeks, Trump is going to continue to antagonize his opponents. ICE is going to provoke the people. You'll have random shootings of ICE agents, and then you'll have martial law, National Guard will come in, and these things can escalate really quickly. And then you'll have these secret agents, deep state agents, working among insurrection groups, organizing them, encouraging violence, teaching them how to sabotage. If you just look at movies like Civil War and one battle after another, it's really predictive programming, right? They're really trying to get people in the mindset of civil war, because ultimately at the end of the day, civil war is what benefits the oligarchy. One, because it prevents people from recognizing the true enemies, the oligarchy, but also remember that America is $38 trillion in debt. And so if your house is worth $1 million and you owe $10 million to the bank, what you do is you burn the house down and you collect the insurance money. And that's a game plan of the oligarchy. And what's going to happen is that this ICE officer is going to get invited to the White House, and he'll be a guest of honor for Trump. And this will just enrage half of the population of America. Trump used to work in reality TV, right? The World Wrestling Federation. He knows how to push buttons. He knows how to piss people off so that they want to actually pick up arms.